January 16, 1975. Grand Forks Air Force Base, North Dakota. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and the winter air lies heavy over the concrete runway like a held breath. You can hear it before you see it, a low, rising whine, metallic and impatient, cutting through the flat silence of the plains. Floodlights reflect off bare aluminum skin. No paint, no insignia, just raw metal and sharp angles. At the center of the runway sits an F-15A Eagle, serial number 720119. The ground crew calls it Streak Eagle. Lieutenant Colonel David Peterson stands near the nose gear, helmet under his arm, oxygen mask dangling. His flight suit is zipped to the throat. He has flown fighters for years, but today is different. Today there will be no dogfight, no enemy radar, no missiles on the wings. The aircraft is stripped to the bone. No paint, no radar, no fire control system, no gun. Even the brakes are lighter than standard. Every unnecessary pound has been removed for one purpose only: climb. Across the Arctic Ocean and deep behind concrete walls in Moscow, Soviet engineers will soon be staring at data that should not exist. The tower clears the aircraft. The crew chief steps back and raises his hand. Peterson climbs the ladder and drops into the cockpit. The canopy comes down with a solid mechanical clack, sealing him inside a world of dials, pressure, and vibration. Twin Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines begin to spool up, their roar flattening the air behind the aircraft. The F-15 Eagle was already feared by intelligence analysts in the Eastern Bloc. Designed after hard lessons learned in Vietnam, it was rumored to have power unlike anything in the sky. 2 engines producing more thrust than the aircraft weighed when fully fueled. The Soviets knew the numbers on paper. What they didn't believe was what those numbers could do in the real world. Peterson advances the throttles. The engines howl. The Streak Eagle surges forward, tires screaming against the concrete. Acceleration slams Peterson back into the seat. The light boards blur. At rotation speed, he pulls gently on the stick. The nose lifts, and the aircraft doesn't just take off, it leaps. Within seconds, the Eagle pitches into a near-vertical ascent, not a graceful arc, but a brutal, physics-defying ascent. The horizon drops away. Blue sky darkens rapidly. The vertical speed indicator spins like a compass in a storm. 30,000 feet per minute. Inside the cockpit, the aircraft shakes as it tears upward through cold, thinning air. Peterson's breathing becomes deliberate, practiced, short, controlled bursts to keep blood in his head. The G-forces aren't extreme yet, but the rate of climb is unlike anything flown before. This is not combat flying. This is a controlled assault on gravity itself. Below him, radar operators and engineers watch their scopes in disbelief. The first target altitude is 3,000 meters. The Eagle punches through it in seconds, then 6,000, then 9,000. Each checkpoint falls faster than the last. The aircraft is performing exactly as the engineers hoped, and better than some of them dared predict. At 30,000 feet, the engines are still pushing hard. The F-15 doesn't feel like it's running out of breath. It feels hungry. This flight isn't about combat supremacy, at least not openly. Officially, it's a record attempt, an exercise in performance measurement. Unofficially, it's a message written not in words, but in climb rates, timestamps, and sealed Fédération Aéronautique Internationale documents. The Soviet Union has long dominated the world of aviation records. Their aircraft, MiGs and Sukhois, hold altitude and climb achievements like trophies. These records are political weapons, proof that socialism can out-engineer capitalism. And now, on a frozen runway in North Dakota, An unpainted American jet is about to erase them. Peterson levels briefly, checks his instruments, then pushes again. The Eagle responds instantly, surging higher. At 20,000 meters, 65,600 feet, the aircraft finally begins to feel the strain. Air thins, control surfaces soften, the engines roar, but the climb slows. Still, the record is shattered. When Peterson brings the aircraft back down and touches the runway, there's no cheering crowd, no cameras, just quiet men with clipboards, sealing data, verifying numbers. They know what has just happened, and they know it's only the beginning. Because this was just the first record. Over the next 2 weeks, the Streak Eagle will return to this runway again and again. Each time it will climb faster, higher, more violently than before. Each time another Soviet-held world record will fall. And in design bureaus thousands of miles away, Soviet engineers will begin asking a question that has no comfortable answer. What kind of aircraft have the Americans really built?
January 18, 1975. Grand Forks Air Force Base wakes again before dawn, the sky a dull iron gray. The Streak Eagle sits exactly where it did 2 days earlier, its bare metal skin rimed with frost. Nothing about it looks dramatic, and yet every man on the flight line moves with the quiet urgency of people handling something dangerous, not because it might explode, but because it might change the balance of power. Inside a heated trailer near the runway, engineers pore over printouts from the first flight, stopwatches, barometric corrections, engine performance curves. The data is clean, too clean. There is no error to hide behind. The Eagle did exactly what it was designed to do, and more. Today's goal is different. The first record proved the aircraft could reach altitude faster than anything before it. The second is more humiliating for America's rivals. Time to climb at multiple altitude brackets, one after another, in a single, merciless sequence. This isn't about a lucky run. This is about repeatability. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson is not flying today. Instead, Major Roger Smith straps into the cockpit, his face calm, almost detached. The pilots chosen for these flights are not thrill seekers. They are human components in a carefully engineered system. If they pull too hard or hesitate for a fraction of a second, the record is lost. Smith runs through the checklist. The canopy seals, engines spool. Again, the runway becomes a blur. The Streak Eagle lifts off and pitches upward, steeper than before. The angle is aggressive, nearly 30 degrees, and the jet tears into the sky like a missile with a cockpit. The sensation inside is violent but controlled. Airframe vibration hums through the seat, through the bones. The altimeter needle spins so fast it's almost unreadable. At 1,000 meters, the Eagle is already ahead of the old Soviet benchmark. At 3,000 meters, the margin is no longer respectable, it is obscene. In Moscow, at the Central Aerodynamic Institute, engineers will later review the American data in silence. According to their calculations, this rate of climb should push the F-15 into compressor stall. The engines should choke, the airframe should protest. None of that happens. The Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines keep delivering thrust with ruthless consistency. Each engine alone produces more power than early jet fighters had combined. Together, they give the F-15 a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1. In plain terms, this aircraft can accelerate straight up. At 6,000 meters, Smith adjusts the pitch by a degree, just enough to keep the engines inside optimal airflow parameters.
This is where previous record holders began to lose energy, their climb flattening, their advantage bleeding away. The eagle does not flatten. It keeps clawing upward, unbothered. The timer clicks past another Soviet record, then another. Ground controllers announce each milestone in clipped, almost emotionless tones. No one cheers. The numbers speak for themselves. Each time to climb figure isn't just better, it's devastatingly better. Seconds shaved off records that took years to achieve. At 9,000 meters, the aircraft is still accelerating vertically. This is where the data becomes disturbing. Soviet doctrine emphasizes high-altitude interception. Their MiG-25 Foxbat was built to race upward and meet American bombers before they could strike. On paper, the Foxbat is fast, powerful, and formidable, but it climbs like a sprinter running out of breath, brilliant in the first moments, then fading. The Eagle, by contrast, climbs like a machine that doesn't understand the concept of limits. Smith's breathing is steady, but the workload is immense. He balances pitch, throttle, and timing with surgical precision. A second too long at the wrong angle could cost the record, or worse, overstress the airframe. But the jet feels solid, obedient, almost eager. At 15,000 meters, the final target for the day, the Eagle passes the altitude marker well ahead of schedule. Record confirmed. When Smith lands, engineers swarm the aircraft, not to celebrate, but to inspect. They check the engines, the intakes, the control surfaces. Everything is within tolerance. No cracked panels, no warped metal. The aircraft looks ready to go again. That is what truly alarms the analysts. This isn't a prototype on the edge of failure. This is a production fighter, lightly modified, performing feats that Soviet planners believed required extreme specialization. Within days, intelligence summaries reach the Kremlin. The Americans have broken multiple climb records, not once, but repeatedly using the same airframe. There is no experimental trick, no rocket assist, just aerodynamics, thrust, and doctrine executed with ruthless efficiency. One Soviet engineer reportedly mutters a single sentence after reviewing the charts. Then our assumptions are wrong. And in the Cold War, wrong assumptions get people killed.
January 22, 1975. The wind cuts across the airfield in sharp, uneven gusts, rattling loose equipment and snapping at flags. Grand Forks Air Force Base has become a place of routine now. Arrived before dawn, fly, verify, repeat. But beneath that routine, tension grows. This flight will aim higher than any before it. The target today is altitude itself. Not time to climb, not acceleration, pure, unforgiving height. The Streak Eagle is rolled from its hangar under gray skies, its aluminum skin reflecting the cold light like a blade. Engineers move with an almost reverent care. Every bolt, every panel has been checked twice. Fuel load is calculated to the kilogram. Too much weight, and the aircraft will fail to reach the ceiling. Too little, and the engines will flame out on the edge of space. Captain George Jellison is the pilot today. He climbs into the cockpit knowing this flight will push the aircraft into a regime few fighters have ever entered. Above 80,000 feet, the sky is no longer blue. It fades toward black. Control surfaces lose authority. Jet engines struggle for air. Mistakes up there are not corrected, they are punished. The engines light. Jellison accelerates down the runway and lifts off cleanly, pitching into a steep climb almost immediately. The Eagle surges upward, but this time the profile is different. It is not a brute force sprint. It is a carefully shaped arc, conserving energy for the final leap.
At 30,000 feet, the aircraft levels briefly, building speed, fast, faster, until the airframe hums with restrained violence. Then, Jellison pulls back hard. The Eagle pitches skyward, converting speed into altitude in a classic zoom climb. The nose rises past 45 degrees, then 60, then more. The horizon disappears entirely. Outside the canopy, the sky darkens. Inside, the engine noise changes, still powerful, but strained, like a runner breathing through clenched teeth. Airspeed bleeds away rapidly. The altimeter winds higher and higher. 70,000 feet. The jet is now flying on the edge of aerodynamic relevance. The air is so thin that the wings are barely wings at all. They are suggestions, shapes coaxing lift from molecules spread far apart. Jellison's inputs become delicate, almost polite. Too much control movement, and the aircraft could depart controlled flight. At 80,000 feet, the engines flame out. Silence crashes into the cockpit. The Eagle is now a ballistic object, coasting upward on momentum alone. Jellison watches the altimeter with absolute focus. The needle slows more. 85,000 feet. Then, finally, it stops. The official figure will later be confirmed at over 98,000 feet, higher than any fighter aircraft had ever flown, higher than Soviet designers believed possible without rocket assistance. The record does not just surpass the previous one, it annihilates it. For a few weightless seconds, the Eagle hangs at the top of its climb, suspended between Earth and space. Then, gravity takes over. Jellison pushes the nose down gently. The aircraft begins to fall, nose first, picking up speed rapidly. As denser air returns, the engines relight with a violent shudder. Control authority snaps back. The Eagle becomes a fighter again, roaring its way back into controlled flight. On the ground, telemetry confirms what eyes could not fully believe: another world record. In the Soviet Union, the reaction is immediate and severe. At MiG and Sukhoi design bureaus, emergency meetings are called. Chalkboards fill with equations, slide rules scratch, engineers rerun simulations, adjusting assumptions, altering coefficients, searching for the flaw. But the flaw is not in the math. It is in the philosophy. Soviet fighters are built around interception, short bursts of speed, rapid climbs, brute power followed by limitations. The American Eagle is built around sustained energy dominance. It is not meant to win a single moment. It is meant to own the entire vertical battle space. And now, that truth is undeniable. By the end of the week, the Streak Eagle will break 8 world records in total, climb times and altitudes that will stand for decades. But the real damage is invisible. It is done in briefing rooms, in red folders stamped secret, in the quiet realization that the United States has fielded an aircraft that does not merely compete, it redefines what a fighter can do.
Late January 1975. Moscow is locked in winter. Snow piles against the walls of gray ministries, and inside those walls, men in dark suits sit beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, staring at numbers that refuse to behave. The data arrives in sealed diplomatic channels, filtered through intelligence summaries, stripped of American bravado and press language, just figures, altitudes, times, verified by international observers. There is no room to call them propaganda. 8 world records, broken in less than 2 weeks by a single airframe. At the Mikoyan Gurevich Design Bureau, senior engineers gather around a long table.
Some of them helped design the MiG-21, others the MiG-25. They are not amateurs. These are men who have pushed aluminum and steel to their limits for decades. And yet, the American climb profiles make no sense within the framework they trust. One engineer points at the thrust-to-weight calculations. Another shakes his head. A third suggests the Americans must be using water injection or hidden rocket boost or falsified empty weights. But every theory collapses under scrutiny. The F-15's engines are conventional turbofans. The airframe uses no exotic materials. The records were observed, timed, and sealed. There is nothing to debunk. What unsettles them most is not the altitude, it is the repeatability. The Streak Eagle didn't limp back to the ground after each flight. It didn't crack or deform. It flew again, and again, and again. This suggests something far more dangerous than a record breaker. It suggests a combat aircraft with vast energy reserves. In Soviet doctrine, altitude is life. Height means radar advantage, missile range, escape options. If an American fighter can outclimb everything in the Soviet inventory and do it repeatedly, then entire interception models must be rewritten. The implications spread outward like fractures in ice. If the Eagle can reach altitude faster, it can choose when to fight. If it can sustain energy, it can disengage at will. If it controls the vertical, then Soviet pilots are reacting, not acting. At Sukhoi, a classified memo circulates proposing new wing designs, altered intake geometries, higher temperature engine materials. All of it will take years. None of it will help against aircraft already operational. Because that is the final insult. The Streak Eagle is not a prototype. It is a lightly modified version of a fighter already entering U.S. Air Force service. Thousands of pilots will eventually fly Eagles that share the same aerodynamic soul, even if they carry radar, weapons, and paint. And that thought is intolerable. Back in the United States, the flights end quietly. There is no parade, no triumphant speech. The Streak Eagle is repainted, refitted, and returned to the fleet. Official statements are restrained. The records are acknowledged, then buried under layers of routine military reporting. But the message has been delivered, not in words, in performance. For the first time since the early jet age, the Soviet Union is forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. American fighter design has leapt ahead, not incrementally, but fundamentally. The balance of the air war has shifted, not by numbers, but by capability. And every Soviet engineer understands what comes next. A race. A desperate attempt to claw back the vertical advantage that has just been stripped away in plain view of the world.
Spring 1975. The snow melts in North Dakota, and Grand Forks Air Force Base returns to its ordinary rhythm. Fighters come and go. Pilots train. The Streak Eagle's record flights already feel distant, almost unreal, like something that happened in a sealed laboratory rather than under open sky. But the consequences are moving outward, quietly and irreversibly. Inside U.S. Air Force briefing rooms, the data from those 8 record flights is no longer treated as a stunt. It becomes doctrine. Charts showing climb profiles and energy retention are pinned to walls. Instructors point at them with metal rulers and explain what they mean in combat terms. This is how you own the fight. The Eagle is not meant to turn tighter than everything else. It is not meant to chase blindly. It is meant to dominate the vertical, to climb above the enemy, convert altitude into speed, strike, and leave before retaliation is possible.
This philosophy, born from the hard lessons of Vietnam, now has proof, not theory, proof stamped by international aviation authorities. Young pilots arriving for F-15 conversion training hear the story of the Streak Eagle like a quiet legend. They learn that their aircraft is not just fast, it is forgiving. It carries power in reserve. It gives options, and options are survival. Across the world, Soviet planners are drawing the same conclusions, only from the opposite side of the table. Exercises are reevaluated, intercept timelines are adjusted, new performance requirements are drafted in red ink. The MiG-29 and Su-27 programs gain urgency, their designers pushed to achieve what the Eagle already has: sustained energy, controllability at high angles of attack, and engines that do not quit when pushed hard. But engineering is not magic. It takes time, and time is something the Soviet Union does not have much of. By the late 1970s, F-15s are stationed in Europe, their presence impossible to ignore. NATO pilots trust them implicitly. They know that if the fight goes vertical, they are not trapped, they are advantaged. The Soviet pilots who face them in training simulations and distant radar tracks sense it too. They see eagles climb where they cannot easily follow. They feel the pressure of an aircraft that dictates terms without firing a shot. All of it traces back to those cold mornings in January 1975, to a bare metal jet that rose straight up and made decades of assumptions collapse under their own weight. The Streak Eagle's records will stand for years. Some will never be broken by manned fighters. But the true legacy is not the numbers in record books. It is the shift in confidence. The understanding that air superiority is not about maximum speed or isolated brilliance. It is about energy, control, and the ability to decide when the fight begins and when it ends. And in that realization, the Soviet engineers were not just baffled, they were beaten.